Hello and welcome to the Heritage Foundation. I'm Andrew Parks. I'm the program coordinator for lectures and seminars. We'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning, and we just want to give you that final courtesy or ask that you check to make sure that cell phones have been turned off as a courtesy to those recording today's events and to our panelists. Other than that, for those watching online, you're welcome to submit questions via emailing speaker@heritage.org. And introducing our moderator today is Ali Al-Yami. He's the director for the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia. It's my pleasure to introduce Ali.
Thank you all very much for coming. It's early morning, so people will keep coming, I hope. This is a very important issue we are discussing, and this is actually the first, but hopefully not last, opening and discussion of this UN resolution regarding defamation of religions. This resolution has been changed many times, and the language has changed, but the objective is still the same, and that is to silence free people from speaking freely. And this is one thing that we in this room, in this country, should never accept. The only thing we have is our freedom, and if we don't have it, then we will be another country somewhere. The Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia was established to to focus totally on the Saudi government policies, domestic policies and foreign policies, and that's what we do. And if the Saudi government is not behind this resolution, and it is the home for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and most of those groups or most of those states are actually, they receive financial assistance from Saudi Arabia. Therefore, it will be very difficult for them, those groups, not to do what the Saudis want them to do, just like we do in this country, unfortunately for us. Before I go on to finish my remark, I really want to thank the Heritage Foundation for continue to stand up for these kinds of very sensitive, very controversial issues and never sway like many other groups. So I appreciate their support and I appreciate their courage for continuing to work with CDHR on these important issues. Anything we do about the Arab world or the Muslim world, specifically Saudi Arabia and the Gulf state, is very difficult thing to do, and there are many pros and cons, and there are many people who do not want to see us expose the threat of this Islamist, extremist, dangerous ideology, whose target, first and foremost, whose target actually are the Muslim people. But they could not control totally the Muslim people I'm talking about the regimes now. There are differences between the regimes and the people in the Arab world and the Muslim world. They have no voice. So the regimes are the one who decide, and we have to differentiate those two. Before they could, as long as they can, they will try to control their people and deny them the right to speak up, or to deny them the right to participate and charter a better future for themselves and their countries. In order for them to continue that, they have to defeat democracies, especially the West. And if they defeat democracies, then they will have an opposition to do whatever they want to do and continue what they are doing, and that is oppressing their people. This resolution we are going to be discussing, these are very capable, intelligent, educated people who know a lot about this resolution and a lot of the Middle East politics. And I salute all of them for standing up and speaking up and defending our rights, because these are the ones who keep decision makers and politicians in line, or at least aware that somebody is going to challenge them. This resolution is based on a conference that took place in Egypt, Cairo, Egypt, in 1996, which is totally opposed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations in 1945. That's the basis for it. That's how it's established. And the same discussion in 96 was repeated in Dakar, Senegal, and I believe 2005 or 2004. Without going on to discuss this issue, because these people know quite a lot about these issues, and they will discuss it with you, share it with you. The most important thing for you is to ask questions and to challenge them, actually. Challenge them if there is something you agree with or disagree with or you want to add. This is the beauty of having the open discourse, and that could only happen in democratic societies. I would like to, I'm not the moderator actually, she's the moderator here, but Claire Lopez currently is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and the Clarion Fund and vice president of the Intelligence Summit. She formerly was career operation officer with the Central Intelligence Agency, a professor at the Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies, executive director of the Iran Policy Committee from 2005 to 2006, and has served as a consultant intelligence analyst and researcher for a variety of defense firms. She was named a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute, and that's where I graduated from, Claremont Graduate School Institute. Already, I'm reading what she has given me. Already an advisor to EMP Act America in February 2012, Ms. Lopez was named a member of the Congressional Task Force on National and Homeland Security. My son works for the Homeland Security, actually. We are connected here. Lopez was named a member of the I just read that one. Task Force National Homeland Security, which focuses on the electromagnetic pulse threat to the nation. She is Deputy Director of the U.S. Counterterrorism Advisory Team for the Military Department of the South Carolina National Guard and serves as a member of the boards of advisors or directors for the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia. Clear.
Well, thank you very much, Ali, and thanks to all of you for being here for this very important conference. I think we're all gathered here for the same reason, and that is that we would like to defend those Judeo-Christian ideals that are dedicated to equality, individual liberty, and the natural rights that America's founding fathers acknowledged in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Our First Amendment enumerates the most important of these precious liberties upon which no U.S. government may infringe. Among these are the rights to freedom of belief and speech, and they must count as the cornerstone of our Republic's extraordinary record of opportunity for all who embrace these principles. As Ali has done, I would like to extend a special expression of thanks and gratitude to the Heritage Foundation, also to our hosts, and also to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Their members, all of them, stand at the forefront of Americans' defense of these critical and cherished ideals. Today, we will examine one of the most dangerous and insidious of all the challenges to the freedoms many Americans take for granted. That is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's agenda to criminalize the criticism of Islam. Its long history of steadfast dedication to the implementation of Islamic law on slander and blasphemy is in no way diminished by the recent Resolution 1618, the topic of our conference today, adopted by the UN Human Rights Council in April 2011, just about 1 year ago. Our speakers today will outline how a lengthy series of official and completely unaltered OIC documents posted at its website, beginning with what Ali mentioned, the infamous Cairo Declaration of 1990, which, as you probably know, dedicated all of the member states of the OIC, the Muslim states of the world, to replacing the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights with Sharia, with Islamic law. In any place where there is a contradiction on human rights issues, it is Sharia, according to the Cairo Declaration, that takes precedence for all Muslim countries in the world, members of the OIC. So beginning with that infamous Cairo Declaration of 1990, our speakers then will also discuss how those documents at its website attest to that organization's implacable commitment to subjugating U.S., Western, and all nations not governed yet by Sharia. The inclusion in Resolution 1618 of misleading language, in fact, was deliberately designed specifically to get the United States government on board with the Sharia agenda and is testament to the patience of the Islamic Ummah the OIC claims to represent. In the recent words of Muslim Brotherhood spiritual guide Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the best way to suborn non-Sharia compliant governments is through gradualism, just as Syed Qutb wrote in his seminal jihadist field manual called Milestones. Make no mistake, Resolution 1618 is part of that overall campaign. So, to our distinguished panel, whose members will discuss the utter incompatibility of the United States Constitution with the OIC's agenda to criminalize free speech about Islam in America. Speaking truth about Islam and the threat that Islamic law poses to freedom-loving people everywhere is not Islamophobia, a word created, after all, by the Muslim Brotherhood and the OIC. U.S. national security leadership must come to its senses, and soon, with policies that recognize and confront that threat if we are to preserve the precious freedoms that we all hold dear. Let's begin the panel then with Deborah Weiss. Deborah Weiss currently works for Vigilance, an organization dedicated to educating the public on terrorism-related issues. Ms. Weiss previously worked as an attorney for the Office of the Corporation Counsel under Mayor Rudy Giuliani in New York City, served as counsel for the Committee on House Oversight in Congress, and was Manhattan director of the Forbes for President campaign. She's a contributor to Front Page Magazine, The Washington Times, The Weekly Standard, National Review Online, and many others. She authored a chapter on the OIC, United Nations resolutions, in the recently released book titled Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamist Threat, a Terrorist Network, and she is a survivor of the 9/11 attacks in New York City. Deborah Weiss.
Hi, thank you very much. I want to thank Ali Aliyama for inviting me here to speak today, and Heritage for hosting this event, and for all of you for coming and educating yourselves on this important topic. To pick up where Claire left off about the OIC, they present themselves as a moderate organization, but in fact they're a supremacist, Islamist supremacist organization that seeks to make Islam a victorious political power and to deny freedom to anybody who doesn't want to live under Sharia law, including Muslims who don't want to live under Sharia law. Toward this end, they want to criminalize all speech that's critical of Islam, and they've been pushing UN resolutions that would gradually and incrementally accomplish that goal. Under the guise of responsible speech, politically correct speech, or sensitive speech, what the OIC really wants to do is to stifle your freedom of speech. So in order to do that, it's targeted various UN bodies and some EU parliaments as well, introducing the language in a watered-down form in order to achieve its goal gradually and incrementally. So the first resolution I'm going to discuss with you today is called Combating Defamation of Religions, or Defamation of Religions for short. Excuse me. This resolution was initially called Defamation of Islam, but when it failed to get sufficient support, they changed the name to Defamation of Religions, although Islam is still the only religion mentioned by text by its name. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept of defamation of religions, what it does is it gives an idea, a religion, in this case Islam, protection from criticism, as opposed to what we have in this country, which is defamation protections for individuals or groups of individuals. So you have defamation of individuals versus defamation of an idea or a religion. The resolution takes numerous assumptions and asserts them as fact. Without any hearings, without any debate, and without any investigations, the resolution asserts that Islam is wrongly associated with Islamic terrorism, it's wrongly associated with human rights violations, and there's been undue backlash against Muslims ever since 9/11. The resolution seeks to prohibit the distribution of, quote, xenophobic ideas and material aimed at any religion or its followers, unquote, and to prevent acts of hatred and defamation, especially as applied to Islam. Believe me, there's absolutely no reciprocity for anti-Jewish or anti-Israel hate speech. In fact, the OIC supports Hamas, it supports Iran's nuclear program, and it rationalizes 9/11. For those of you who are unfamiliar with UN resolutions, they are not legally binding, but they do carry a lot of political clout. If they are passed repeatedly in a particular body, or especially if they're passed in numerous bodies, and the language is also included in legislation passed by EU parliaments, then they carry a lot of power and sway. At some point, they could be deemed customary international law, and at that point, countries that never signed on to it would be pressured to adhere to it. Some of the problems with this resolution is it comes very close to outlawing hostility, which you might have noticed is an emotion. It tries to assert defamation of religions as an international human right, and the resolution also aspires to internationalize the norms of free speech. So in America, we have the First Amendment that governs our speech. Other countries have their own rules regarding free speech, and this resolution aspires to supplant those rules with one single rule across the board. The language of the resolution is vague and likely to be given a broad construction by the most oppressive regimes. In fact, it's resolutions like this that give credibility to Islamic blasphemy laws, making it ever less likely that already oppressed minorities will obtain religious freedom. Merely adhering to one's own religion can be considered blasphemy to another. So if you're Christian and you say, I believe in the Holy Trinity, that would be considered blasphemy to Islam, and under a broad construction of this resolution, it would be considered defamation as well. The timeline for this resolution is it was initially introduced into the UN, what was then called the Commission on Human Rights, in 1999. In 2005, a similar resolution was introduced into the General Assembly. In 2005, you might recall that the Commission on Human Rights folded and popped back up in 2006 under the new name of the Human Rights Council, or HRC for short. It was introduced into the Human Rights Council in 2006, and this resolution was passed every single year subsequent to its initial introduction in all three of those bodies. In 2008 was the first year that the resolution was in jeopardy of not getting passed, but the OIC launched a very aggressive campaign to do everything it could to ensure that it would. One of the many things it did was to hold 2 summits on Islamophobia. The first summit, they established the existence of Islamophobia and announced that they would have a zero tolerance for it. They asserted that they were going to defend themselves against all free expression that constituted Islamophobia and encouraged people to file complaints about the most trivial things, including hostile glances. They said they were going to target cartoonists, film producers, reporters, and governments. They also unveiled the first annual Islamophobia report called the OIC Observatory on Islamophobia. It consisted of 58 pages of real, imagined, or claimed incidents of Islamophobia. Excuse me. That report is now produced annually, and there's also a monthly bulletin that they produce as well. I got a copy of the first Islamophobia bulletin that was produced and was very surprised to find that a lot of the examples in there were not bad things that non-Muslims were doing to Muslims, but bad things that Muslims were doing to non-Muslims. So how can this be? If you understand that the OIC's definition of Islamophobia includes accurate reports, the veracity of which are not in dispute, as long as it sheds a negative light on anything to do with Islam or Muslims, then you'll understand how they came up with these. And by the way, a lot of times the media takes the statistics given to them by the OIC or CARE or other Islamophobia tracking organizations and repeats the statistics without checking into the nature of the claims. The numbers alone can be quite alarming. So I'm going to give you a few examples of actual incidents that I found in one of the monthly bulletins from 2008 when this first started. The first one was that in 2008, the country of Qatar opened its first Christian church. Muslims protested. There were Arabic articles saying that Christians should not have the right to erect a house of worship in a Muslim country. One English language publication translated one of those Arabic articles, and that reprinting was Islamophobic. It was Islamophobic that Wikipedia refused to remove the depictions of the Muslim prophet Muhammad from their English language website. That was considered Islamophobic. And it was Islamophobic that the EU asked Iran to drop the death penalty for the crime of apostasy. The OIC repeatedly asserts that Islamophobia is one of the greatest threats to the causes of world peace and global security, rather than concluding that perhaps Islamophobia is the result of the actions taken by a radical Islamist movement around the globe. As a result of the OIC's victimhood campaign, the resolution passed yet again in 2008, although this time with declining support. Subsequently, in the Human Rights Council, they passed a rule which said that nobody can come before this body and say anything that would, quote unquote, judge or evaluate a religion. Thereafter, the International Humanist Ethical Union, the IHEU, introduced for consideration violence against women, including the fact that little girls in Iran, sometimes as young as age 9, are forced to get married, stoning against women, and female genital mutilation. The Human Rights Council said that's permissible under Sharia law, and therefore we cannot consider it because you are judging or evaluating a religion by bringing it up. So it appears that anything that is a human rights violation that's permitted under Sharia law can no longer be addressed in the Human Rights Council, the council that was purportedly designed to address human rights violations. So it's interesting to note that the IHEU never mentioned the word Islam or Sharia, but merely the conduct. So that lets you know that it's not just the names of the religions themselves that you can't discuss, but the effects of a radical interpretation as well. So now I'm going to discuss with you Resolution 1618 to combat intolerance based on religion or belief. It has a much longer title, but we'll just leave it at that. The background for this is, as I said, it had some declining support. In 2011 was the first time in 12 years that the OIC did not introduce the defamation of religions resolution into the UN. So it passed every year in the bodies I mentioned previously, all the way through and including 2010. The resolution, this new resolution, Resolution 1618, was introduced and passed into the Human Rights Council in March of 2011. The State Department and numerous Christian organizations touted it as a huge success because supposedly this resolution was going to move from the concept of defamation of religions, protecting the religion and the idea, to protecting individuals or groups of individuals. So isn't that great? Well, it would be if it were true, but let's look at the language a little bit more closely. The text of the resolution definitely drops the phrase defamation of religions. Instead, it focuses on intolerance, discrimination, and violence based on religion or belief. It expressed the need to combat religious stereotypes and, pay attention to my language, incitement to religious hatred, conflating incitement to violence, and incitement to hatred. So they're conflating action and an emotion. It condemns the advocacy of religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, whether it involves the use of print, audiovisual, electronic media, or other means. And it urges states to take effective measures to combat it. So what's at issue here is the definition of incitement, and there's ample reason to believe that criticism of Islam, in other words, defamation of religions, will constitute the advocacy of hatred that is tantamount to the condemned incitement. It expresses deep concern with the quote-unquote programs and agendas pursued by extremist groups aimed at perpetuating these stereotypes. So who are these extremist groups? Heritage Foundation, Center for Democracy and Human Rights, anybody who's really fighting for human rights and free expression that would include expression that you're not allowed to have under those Islamic theocracies would be considered extremist groups. It discourages religious profiling for purposes of law enforcement. So it's really important, if they're going to discourage it for law enforcement, how are they defining it? And it's defined in the resolution as, quote, the invidious use of religion as a criterion to conduct interrogations, questioning, searches, and investigations. So notice, nobody's saying that they want to profile people and say, oh, you're Muslim, let's lock you up. No one's saying that. But what this resolution says is you can't even consider someone's ideology or religion as a factor on a list of other elements to consider. Certainly, the language of this resolution drops the defamation of religion's language and replaces it with European hate speech style language. But the issue is that the language is still vague enough that it can be manipulated to retain the same goal of the combating defamation of religions. And the OIC has retained that goal. In July of 2011, there was a high-level diplomatic meeting held in Istanbul, Turkey, on Islamophobia. Secretary Hillary Clinton attended that meeting. She announced at that meeting, she announced to the world that the U.S. State Department was going to be hosting a series of meetings to, quote unquote, move to implementation, Resolution 1618. That conference later became known as the Istanbul Conference. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that because I think Sam's going to go into it. Excuse me. But I'll tell you a little bit about what happened prior to the conference, which is the OIC expressly stated what its intentions were during the conference, that it was planning to use it to push for speech restrictive measures on Islam-related topics. And they expected to develop a legal framework for the resolution that would help enact laws which prevent incitement of hatred, the emotion based on, you guessed it, defamation of religions. So they let everybody know in no uncertain terms that they have not dropped their goal of attaining the defamation of Islam. The OIC's recommendations, as stated in one of their Islamophobia reports, was to include gaps of interpretation of international law in order to criminalize acts of incitement to hatred. So again, the issue is going to be the definition of incitement, and if Pakistan has one definition of incitement and America has another, I'll let you guess which definition the OIC would push for. They said they wanted to apply a test of consequences rather than a content-based test. So for those of you who don't know what that is, we do have laws in America that make it illegal to incite imminent violence, but we have a content-based test. If I say, I hate Joe, he's really mean, I can't stand him, he's terrible to me, and I want all of you to get together tomorrow at 2 o'clock and go kill him, then you will be, and you do that, you will be responsible for murder, but I'll be responsible for my comments because I incited the violence. On the other hand, if I say that I hate Joe, and I say all kinds of terrible things about him, but I don't tell you to go kill him tomorrow, and on your own you go and do that anyway, then you're responsible for murder, and I didn't do anything wrong because I'm allowed to express my opinion in this country. That's our view. It's a content-based test. I didn't encourage you to kill him. That is not the OIC's definition of incitement. They use a consequence-based test. And the example that they most frequently use is of the Danish cartoons. If you remember several years back, there was a series of Danish cartoons that depicted the Muslim prophet Muhammad. Subsequently, there were riots all across the Middle East and throughout the EU. The OIC would say that those riots were the consequence of the cartoons. Embassies were trashed, people were killed, there was all kinds of mayhem. They would say it was as a result of those cartoons. But I think that you'll agree with me when I point out that there was nothing inherently consequent about it. It was subsequent, but not consequent, and the rioters chose to react in that manner. If you have the Judeo-Christian values of personal responsibility, where does the responsibility lie? Does it lie with the person who expressed their opinion, or does it lie with the person who chooses to react in a violent manner? Why is it that when a cross was put in urine, Or in the Brooklyn Museum, there was a painting of the Virgin Mary and someone threw cow dung on it. There weren't riots and property damage and violence. Instead, Christians wrote letters to the editor, they wrote op-eds, and they contacted Mayor Giuliani. Our office handled that, by the way. They contacted Mayor Giuliani and asked him not to support the Brooklyn Museum with taxpayer dollars. So, and finally, the OIC said that their goal is to, quote, eradicate all manifestations of Islamophobia, unquote. So if their goal is to eradicate it, it's really important to know how they're defining it. And they define it as, quote, any anti-Islam or anti-Muslim attitude or activity, unquote. So you might have noticed that they're not just talking about violence, and they're not just talking about discrimination, and they're not even just talking about speech, but any attitude or thought as well. The OIC in these resolutions is continually conflating violence with speech, conflating actions with emotion, hatred. They're always talking about incitement to hatred. Is that something we should be criminalizing? They conflate race with religion. If you're Islamophobic, you're racist. What race is Islam? They redefine words. They say that they don't believe that, and they don't want defamation, but in their definition of defamation, defamation can be true, even if it's offensive to them. In our system, truth is a complete defense. They say they believe in freedom of speech, but freedom of speech doesn't include freedom of blasphemy. And they say they believe in defamation of religions, but defamation of religions means defamation of Islam, not of Judaism. This administration has stated that he wants to work with the OIC toward their mutual goals out of mutual respect. And that sounds just great until you find out that the OIC's definition of respect is that you should just shut up if you're saying something that they don't like. A lot of people don't believe that we're going to lose our First Amendment freedoms tomorrow. And we're not going to lose them tomorrow, but it still can happen in America. Freedom, if you look around the world and throughout history, is the exception, not the rule. The process of losing freedom can occur slowly, gradually, and incrementally, not always in a violent coup. There are places today that once were free that have now lost their freedom or are in the process of doing so. If the public is not made aware of the threat to freedom and can't name it by name in order to address it in its early stages, then by the time people wake up, it might be too late. So here's how I see the process going generally. First, people say we should have responsible speech, sensitive speech, politically correct speech. In other words, self-censorship. Then, governments and institutions lay out restrictive guidelines and policies. That includes universities. A lot of Americans don't realize that we have that in our government today. Government agencies charged with fighting the war on terror, for example, the Department of Homeland Security and the National Counterterrorism Center, have issued memos discouraging intelligence professionals from using words like Islamic terrorism. Our National Security Strategy Memo, which is the guiding document for our entire country's national security policies, have deleted all references of Islamic terrorism from their documents. And most recently, the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies have completely rewritten their training manuals, telling explicitly intelligence professionals and national security professionals to focus on the behavior of terrorism and to, quote, de-link it, unquote, from the underlying ideology that motivates it. The next step would be civil violations, and Canada is a good example of that. Canada has a constitution that affords them free speech, yet in almost every province there's a Commission on Human Rights that on a regular and frequent basis issues fines for people who defame Islam, even if they have not defamed any individual. And there's a push to have those commissions in America. My understanding is one has already started in Philadelphia. The final step in the process would be to criminalize speech. And a lot of you might be familiar with the case of Dutch Member of Parliament Geert Wilders from the Netherlands. He was prosecuted for expressing his views on Islam. And while his views on Islam are extreme, and you might not agree with them, should he be jailed for those views? He has said repeatedly he has nothing against Muslims, but just has a problem with the ideology of Islam. Although he was acquitted, merely having that criminal prosecution had the chilling effect of free speech. And I think it's very interesting to note that the language under which he was prosecuted in the Dutch Penal Code was very similar to the language of this resolution, which was incitement to hatred language. In conclusion, I'd like to say that the Founding Fathers drafted the First Amendment in part to protect offensive speech. The way to counter bad ideas is with good ideas. I think it's very likely that the OIC knows this, and that's why, instead of expressing their own ideas to counter arguments with which they disagree, they seek to shut down the debate entirely. So when there's a speaker on campus that they don't agree with, instead of having a counter speaker or another program expressing their views, they try to get that speaker canceled. Combating defamation of religions is not a human right, but stands in direct opposition to real human rights. Only people should be afforded human rights. Ideas, religions, and policies should not get protection from criticism. Indeed, where you see religion getting protection from criticism, you will also see gross human rights violations, because it is free speech that constitutes the human right, not its restriction. In short, resolutions like the ones I've discussed with you today harm free speech rights, they harm religious freedom, they harm human rights, and they harm national security and counterterrorism prevention efforts. And though there are people who identify themselves as Muslim who are not in accord with the OIC's agenda, nevertheless, the members of the OIC do stone women, force little girls to get married, and rationalize planes being flown into buildings. If they can convince you that they are the victims of Islamophobia rather than the perpetrators of a dangerous ideology, then their proposals on restrictions on free speech will cause more harm to American national security and freedom than 9/11 ever did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for that excellent overview of the issues related to Resolution 1618 and our freedoms as Americans, especially free speech. Let's go next now to Jack Pierce. Jack Pierce was advisor to USAID and served as Assistant Chief of the United States Justice Department Antitrust Division. He also held the position of Deputy General Counsel of the White House Office of Consumer Affairs. In private law practice, he helped found and coordinate coalitions of commercial transportation buyers, consumer groups, economists, and environmental groups supporting the successful reform of transportation regulation in the United States. He founded and is president of OSI Management Incorporated, servicing attorneys and others in Washington, D.C. He is a member of the Board of Directors of the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia and has served on the boards of several civic organizations. Jack?
I'm not sure that Ali and Claire were aware that they had set up a contrast of views, but they have. The description of the intent of the OIC group, I'm not in a position to quarrel with. As a matter of fact, I think the alliance, I am on the board of CDHR because I believe the alliance of hegemonic religion with dictatorship is, of course, deadly, repressive for the citizens of the state involved, and is a cultural factor of great importance in the clash of cultures or reconciliation of cultures around the world. But on the specific resolutions of the United Nations, I do not disagree with the OIC intent of gradualism. But I would present to you the view that the UN Resolution 166-167, based on 1618, is a big improvement over the Resolution 2005-3, which was reaffirmed several times prior to this last year. The prior resolution, and the one the OIC in substance continues to desire, is one that does explicitly advocate restrictions on speech, does explicitly encourage nations to do that, does explicitly speak in terms of defamation of religions. The process of this last year or so has removed those specific and dangerous elements from the UN resolution. At this point, the resolution speaks in ample language in terms of free speech, tolerance, dialogue between countries, and so forth. The specific recommendations for government agency activities are all related to individual liberties and to dialogue, promotion of dialogue between nations and between citizens. The flashpoint, which the previous speaker identified, is legitimate. I agree in the sense that this prohibition against incitement of hatred is vague, and it allows OIC some leeway in how to interpret it. However, the thrust of the language, the way it's constructed, is based on Western, European, and American concepts that speech is free, but incitement to violent action is not. We and Europe, and I think most of the globe, would interpret that in the Western modality. Saudi Arabia, some elements of Iran, certainly, and other portions, perhaps, of the Islamic community of nations would not perhaps give that interpretation. But it is a narrowing of the scope of the UN resolution. It's a narrowing of the scope of discouragement, if any, toward effective and free speech. And frankly, you can't get the OIC into the Western box in one step. Gradualism can work both ways. Certainly, there is an attempt to gradually diminish free speech, to diminish any kind of criticism of Islam. That's been well evident, well demonstrated, and continues to be on a daily basis, or almost daily basis, within several Islamic states. But the international expression of that thrust has been limited. Certainly, we in the United States want to prevent what we understand to be the elements of Sharia law, limiting the freedoms which we've fought for, died for, spent several centuries hashing out, and do need carefully to guard. But I submit that we didn't lose ground here. We gained some ground in a long, long struggle. And I think there is reason to believe that in that long struggle, the Western, what we call the Western traditions, free and open scientific and other discourse, will be gaining ground. If you look at the Arab Spring, just to broaden the focus here a little bit, predominantly young, as I understand what's been happening there, largely younger people attuned to the Western and the global, emerging global culture, have thrown off parasitic dictatorships. That wasn't easy, obviously. It was very difficult. But the even harder part is reconstructing social systems which have what we call Western democratic freedom-oriented ordered liberties, we call them. including human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of action. And everybody can see, the people in those countries, the people here, people in Europe, can see that in that reconstruction process, we have a continuing struggle between the traditional Islamic orientations and the people, the strains of thought which created the overthrow of parasitic dictatorships. How will that come out? I don't know. How long will it take to work out? I don't know. I do believe the field position has been improved. So our role, I think, is to continue to demonstrate the merits of our system. We can't kill them all. We can't put our boots on every inch of their ground. Just won't work. They made clear that they don't expect to be bossed around either. What we can do is demonstrate leadership of a global culture which is swinging our way. And that's what we should do.
Thank you so much, Jack, for that enlightening alternative view to what was presented before you. We're going to turn next now to Sam Nunberg for a look at the Istanbul process. Sam serves as director of the Legal Project, an activity of the Middle East Forum, which was founded by Dr. Daniel Pipes in 1990. The Legal Project works to protect the right in the West to freely discuss Islam, terrorism, and terrorist funding. The Legal Project also was a signatory of a joint NGO statement on danger of UN defamation of religions campaign in 2009. Sam Nunberg previously worked as a delegate for the European Center for Law and Justice at the UN, where he met with missions to advocate against the defamation of religions resolutions in 2009 and 2010. Please welcome Sam Nunberg.
Thank you very much. Let me first begin by thanking the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia and the American Islamic Forum for Democracy for hosting me on this distinguished panel and these point of views. I think Deborah covered a lot of my speech, but I'll see what... Well, and the OIC's 1990 charter calls, quote, to combat defamation of Islam and encourage dialogue among civilizations or religions. Yet in 2010, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation suffered a record defeat in achieving that goal when its defamation of religion resolution received only 79 yes votes in the UN General Assembly, down from a 2007 high of 117 states supporting the identical resolution. Now, ironically, the Obama administration's outreach on the defamation of religions resolution from the get-go of its administration actually caused the defamation of religious resolution to lose support. But the OIC wasn't finished in its attempt to criminalize the defamation of Islam. In March 2011, Pakistan, on behalf of the OIC, presented HRC 16.8 to combat intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of and discrimination, incitement of violence, violence against persons based on religion and belief. This was then followed by the OIC's April 2011 release of its annual report on Islamophobia, which contained sections criticizing the opposition to the Ground Zero Cultural Center and the Tea Party movement's role in fanning Islamophobia. Now, what's interesting about that is that it doesn't have any sections criticizing the Occupy Wall Street movement. It doesn't have any sections criticizing unions. It doesn't have any sections criticizing any left movement. I found it also interesting, if you look at it, that it applauds President Obama for having Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense try to stop Terry Jones from burning the Quran. On July 15, 2011, co-chairs of the OIC and the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton were hosted in the historic Yildiz Palace in Istanbul in order to give a united impetus to the implementation of UN Human Rights Council Resolution 1618. This meeting in Istanbul announced a new process of conferences, which promised to go beyond mere rhetoric and to reaffirm their commitment to freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression by urging states to take effective measures as set forth in Resolution 1618, consistent with their obligations under international human rights, and to address and combat intolerance, discrimination, and violence based on religion or belief. Secretary Clinton indicated that the effective ways to counter actions and speech that upset religious adherents would include interfaith education, anti-discrimination laws, and the use of, quote, some old-fashioned techniques of peer pressure and shaving. However, the Western interpretation of peer pressure and shaving is much different than the OIC's member states, especially when the OIC member countries are prosecuting what they deem to be blasphemy. And on the OIC's Newswire, the International Islamic News Agency, a press release describing the Istanbul announcement flatly stated, quote, Washington plans to host a meeting on a resolution opposing defamation of religions. It should also be noted that the OIC will never directly define what it is exactly trying to combat. However, the practices of its member states speak for themselves, and its continued infiltration into the international legal and enforcement community shows exactly where its goals lie. Just look at Saudi Arabia, who used Interpol's Red Alerts system to apprehend a journalist on the blasphemy charges of criticizing Mohammed on Twitter. Further, the conference announced in Istanbul culminated with a closed-door, 3-day session held in Washington, D.C. With the session closed to the public, we were unable to receive the full minutes and testimony. However, some documents were ultimately released, and the full agenda, which became released by the Center for Security Policy, showed that the Homeland Security was participating in these breakout sessions. Some of these sessions were, quote, enforcing anti-discrimination laws, government outreach and training, and a mock roundtable said engagement with religious minority communities. Department of Justice, for the Civil Rights Division, Thomas Perez, stated that HRC 1618 is important to, quote, assert such principles. However, it is equally or even more important to ensure that such principles are put into practice. What are these principles? Well, he follows those remarks by comparing the Istanbul process to the, quote, 100 years in a civil war that took hundreds of thousands of lives to end slavery in America. Mind you, he made these remarks in front of representatives from Saudi Arabia. In remarks delivered on behalf of the State Department, released by the OIC after the closed-door talks ended, the OIC Secretary General made it clear that for the bloc of the 57 Islamic states, quote, the goal remains the same as defamation of religions. Passage of Resolution 1618, he said, quote, clearly demonstrated that a mature international organization, the OIC, was not wedded to either a particular title or the content of a resolution. We just, quote, we just wanted to ensure that the actual matter of vital concern and interest to OIC member states was addressed. So what's next with the Istanbul process? Well, the European Union has now offered to host the next session, and the OIC Secretary General has hailed this as a qualitative shift in the action against the phenomenon of Islamophobia. The long-term implications of the Istanbul process on American policy can't be understated, because we don't exactly know what will go on in the next in the conference in the European Union, and we don't know how that will affect our future administrations. What if the Obama administration isn't in office come 2013? What further resolutions are we going to be signing? What further mock sessions are we going to be planning? Further, we also don't know how this can work with our First Amendment. It's clearly inconsistent with Brandenburg decision, and I would also argue it could be inconsistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19. Ultimately, what I think is we need to have a bigger discussion on the issue. If you try to talk to someone or the average voter, they're not going to be very interested. They'll wave their eyes. But if you go to give them a boilerplate two-line description of what's going on, they'll be shocked. And the American public at large doesn't know. So with that, I'll leave it to the rest of the panel.
Sam, thank you for that overview and clarification on the Istanbul process. We turn now to our final speaker of the panel this morning. He is Dr. Tawfiq Hamid. He's an Islamic thinker and reformer and one-time Islamic extremist from Egypt. He was a member of a terrorist Islamic organization, Jamaat Islamiyah, with Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who became later on the second in command of al-Qaeda. Some 25 years ago, he recognized the threat of radical Islam and the need for a reformation based upon modern, peaceful interpretations of classic Islamic core texts. Dr. Hamid provided a fresh and theologically valid interpretation for the Quran to counterbalance the radical teaching. Currently, Dr. Hamid is a senior fellow and chair of radicalism studies at the Potomac, I apologize, chair of Islamic radicalism studies at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. He is the author of Inside Jihad, Understanding and Confronting Radical Islam. Dr. Hamid, please.
Thank you, Claire, for the introduction, and it's real pleasure and honor to be with you today. Just want to make sure the voice, do you hear clearly at the end, at the back? Yeah, okay. This topic is really one of the most complicated topics we can address in the field of radical Islam or freedom of expression or Islamophobia. This is a very complex topic, and I would like just to put it clear that my understanding of the law as the most recent version of it, that they tried to avoid suppression of freedom of expression and focus on stopping discrimination, stereotyping, intolerance, and inciting violence against people based on their religion. And if this is the law, I fully support it. But all what I'm asking for is that this law must be implemented by all members of the United Nations. You can't expect Western countries to just apply this law and at the same time allow values and belief systems that prevent Christians or minorities from building churches, like in countries like Saudi Arabia, or preventing citizens from becoming presidents of the country, like in Egypt. Recently, the Muslim Brotherhood Murshid or Supreme Guide said clearly that he will not accept at all that a Christian will lead the country or become the president. You can't expect this law to be implemented only here and not implemented there. That is the main core of the issue in my view. It's not in the existence of the law, but in implementing this law globally. If this law is implemented globally, yes, that's great to stop discrimination based on religion or to stop stereotyping. That's a great concept, but you cannot do it in one part of the world without really doing it in the part of the world that need it mostly, which is, I believe, the Muslim world, based on statistics. It's not an opinion. So you hear in America, for example, thousands of mosques and Islamic schools have been built. But when you go to the statistics in several parts of the Muslim world, we have seen churches being burned, set to fire, Christians being attacked. In fact, some Jews are not permitted to enter certain countries. If you are a Jew, you are not permitted, as far as I know, to enter Saudi Arabia. If you are an Israeli, the same. If you went to Israel and your passport is stamped, you are not permitted in many Arab countries. So this form of discrimination must stop as well. You cannot just stop it from one side. You have to work at all levels. The second point that I would like to emphasize is that the OIC itself should take the responsibility of conveying the message of stopping discrimination and intolerance to others to the Muslim world. So it should not probably go and ask the Western world to implement these laws without showing clearly that they conveyed this message via educational systems, via the media, asking the Muslim world and trying to change it to stop discrimination inside the Muslim world itself. So I think that is a responsibility on the OIC to show how, if they are truly committed to the values of preventing discrimination and stopping intolerance, to show how they they will address the Muslim world with these issues and probably ask them to implement these values. The third point I would like to mention is the concept of tolerance. And I will quote here my wife, Dr. Maha, in that one day she came, this was her view, that's why I'd like to quote the person here. She said to me, why many Americans think that tolerance was the cause for them becoming the beacon for democracy and the human rights, and why they think that the liberty in America are caused because of the outcome of their tolerance. In fact, this is what she said, it is their intolerance to certain things like slavery, to discrimination against the blacks, is the cause of liberty that we enjoy today. It was not tolerance that made America the beacon for democracy, liberty, and human rights. It was intolerance to values of slavery and discrimination against people based on skin color or their religion. It's intolerance to these values that make us America here. So, thank you. This is for you, not for me. So it's a very important issue here. It brings me to the issue also of the terminology that's used, the discrimination, for example. Recently in NYPD, the New York City Police Department, there was major problem because they were investigating specifically the Muslim world. I'm a doctor by profession, basically. So I'm speaking here in a scientific manner a bit. If we have a public health department that the food that's imported from certain country X, has repeatedly had some infections coming with this food, if we did specific surveys for this, the food that comes from this country, are we discriminating against this country? Of course not, because you cannot do survey or study every food in the world come from every country. If statistics showed clearly that there is increased percentage of food poisoning coming from food imported from certain parts of the world, you have to do your surveillance or investigations. You have to direct them based on your resources to this part. This doesn't mean you are discriminating. The same here. Statistics, can I get some water? Sorry. Thank you. Statistics showed clearly that the percentage of, or percentage level, that the statistical possibility of a Muslim turning into a jihadist or a terrorist or doing harm to his nation or joining a jihadi group is more common among the Muslim community. These are statistics. It's not an opinion. It's not a view. These are statistical data you can find everywhere, that this possibility is higher. Then doing some specific investigations for our community, I don't see it as a form of discrimination here, because it's exactly like the public health department doing specific investigations based on certain statistics. In fact, I do ask the Muslim world and my Muslim fellows to change the statistics. Change it by preventing their community from going abroad overseas, or reporting them, or showing it's clear change in the educational system so that they stop young Muslims from becoming jihadists. If the statistics change it, I believe of the issue of discrimination here and discussion about this issue will completely change. The other and last point is Islamophobia. A few years ago, I wrote an op-ed at the Wall Street Journal. The title of it was How to End Islamophobia. And many people thought I will ask the Westerns to stop Islamophobia. And in fact, I did something was a bit different. I asked the Muslim world to start showing demonstrations against people like bin Laden. We have seen the Muslim world demonstrating in hundreds of thousands against the cartoon issue of Prophet Muhammad. But until today, we have not seen a single powerful demonstration of that magnitude against the jihadists, the terrorists, and bin Laden. And I think until the world sees such demonstrations, and until the world sees books on the Islamic bookshelves teaching freedom of religion instead of killing apostates, until this happens, it will be very difficult to stop Islamophobia, because here it's like giving me an antigen and not expecting my immune system to react. Why in the West we did not see Buddhophobia or Hinduphobia? Why? Why it is Islamophobia? Shouldn't we ask ourselves why it is Islamophobia, not Hinduphobia or Buddhophobia? Simply because every evidence is, when I hear that there is someone doing terrorism or suicide bombing in America, and sadly, the possibility of someone named a Muslim name is likely to come in the news. So here we deal with an issue here. Who has the responsibility or is responsible for stopping Islamophobia? It's the Muslims themselves. If the Muslim world changed its education, started to demonstrate strongly against the terrorists, and the Muslim scholars, you heard voices loud in the world standing against stoning of women to death or discrimination against the Jews, I believe Islamophobia wouldn't have developed to begin with. So we deal with the phenomena here, where to start. That's very important. And at the end, if you are telling me discrimination against human beings based on their religion is unacceptable and should be criminalized, that is great. But when you hear and read in mainstream Sharia books that the Muslim should declare war against non-Muslims to spread Islam, or a non-Muslim should pay jizya and be humiliated in Muslim communities, should we consider this also a sort of incitement to violence? When you teach people, if we are stopping incitement to violence, will we consider also the Sharia books that promotes violence against non-Muslims or declaring wars against them to be subjugated to Islam or pay jizya or to be killed? Will we consider this also under this law and criminalize such books? I wish to see this happening. I think the law is great. It just needs to be implemented first in the Muslim world, plus the other parts of the world. This is how I see it. The last thing I would like to mention here about defaming religion, which I believe the text or the modifications of the law allow some freedom of expression, but I will address just in 1 minute the point of defaming religion. It's practically impossible to do this. Why? Because let us say someone put some sarcastic expressions like saying, I would like to prove to you how Islam is the religion of peace. And he quoted this part from mainstream Sharia books that tells Muslims to declare war on non-Muslim and subjugate them to Islam. He's doing it as sarcasm, ironic. It's just being sarcastic here. So how would you treat it? You can't prove that this man intentionally want to insult Islam or to call it, and at the same time he can tell you, I mean it, this is evidence that it's peaceful. And also, sarcasm can create a lot of problem in implementing such law. And also, when it comes to someone stating that Prophet Muhammad married a young girl of 7 years old, for traditional Salafi Muslim, they consider it is something to be proud of. In fact, many Islamic books are proud of this fact. But for a Quranic or a Shia, Quranic who do not believe in other things other than the Quran, like they believe not in the Hadith books or non-Islamic, non-Quranic sources, they can say to you, this is an insult to Prophet Muhammad. What will you do then? Where will you go? Is it an insult or something to be proud of? So I think at the practical level, implementing this principle will have major difficulty, because people can start to use sarcasm and irony, and also you will have completely different views between the Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim, Quranics, Sufi Muslim. Some people may say some parts as in and a story about Prophet Muhammad that they are proud of it. Others can consider it defamation of Islam. And I think when it comes to defamation of Islam, it is not the Muslim world that defame Islam. It is the Muslim scholars that teaches hatred, violence, and barbarism against women, against homosexuals, against Jews, against non-Muslims. Any form of teaching that teaches hatred and intolerance to others, I believe should be subjugated to this law if this law is going to be implemented or successful at some stage of human history. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Tawfiq Hamid, for your common sense, your courage of expressing your insights that help us all to understand these issues so much better. We have come to the conclusion of our panel presentations now, and we'd like to open the floor to questions. I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator to ask the first question. And it's directed at the panel in general, and I'll welcome any of you who would like to respond. But the question basically is, where do we go from here? With this particular resolution, 1618, what is the next step? What is the next step for the United States? What is the direction given the current administration, the current Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and her relationship with the Secretary General of the OIC, Ekmelettin Ihsanoglu, and the general organization? Where are we headed from 1618 forward? Anyone who would like to go ahead? Well, please, Dr. Hamid.
Just if I think how to go forward from here, I think the U.S. need to be very clear that this law must be implemented, if it's going to be implemented, not only... yeah, is it...
Just speak closer.
Is it clear now? Yeah. I think to go forward from here is basically to, number one, define the parameters for the words that are used in this law, because they are very vague, so defining parameters is important. And number two, emphasizing the fact that this law is not a law to be implemented only in the United States. It has to be respected by all members of the United Nations, and members who do not conform to such law and who do not stop teaching discrimination against others, who do not teach incitement to, who do not stop incitement to violence in their religious texts or in their interpretations or in their educational systems, there must be some form of punishment to these countries. So I think it has to be very clear that defining parameters and that the law must be implemented globally, not only in the United States.
I would suggest that the most straightforward, first, I really enjoyed Dr. Hamid's, I really enjoyed his discussion.
Thank you.
And it makes the most of the leverage built into this language that could be made of it. As far as the next steps, the specific steps pointed out in the General Resolution 167, which is the formalization at the Security Council level of the 1618 report, those are perfectly sensible steps. So why not just go ahead and try to do them, and with a strong spin toward do this at home, not just here.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to comment. Can people hear me with this? Okay, because regarding the statement that Secretary Hillary Clinton made that we would advocate for using peer pressure and shaming to achieve the same goals that to stifle free speech. Obviously, that's completely the wrong direction already. I agree that it's a good thing that to the extent that the resolution wants to stop discrimination and violence, but it repeatedly uses phrases of, first of all, the incitement, where I told you it's open to interpretation, and the incitement to hatred. Now, obviously, we don't want to encourage hatred, but the fact of the matter is organizations like the OIC use the word hatred whenever people address not just what we would call hatred, but legitimate concerns. Whether you're talking about, for example, take Islamic terrorism. There are people who deny its existence. Other people think it's not only exists, but that it's a big problem. If we were to have an intelligent, scholarly panel on that issue, there's no doubt in my mind that the OIC, that would say this constitutes incitement to hatred. So I think that the U.S. has to take a firm stand on freedom of speech and advocate for a worldwide equivalent of the First Amendment, and to make it very clear that it's trying to, that it doesn't want to discourage the fleshing out of minority viewpoints. And second of all, I also really enjoyed your speech, and I thought that you made some very good points on the issue of Islamophobia. You know what? I lost my train of thought. But I lost my train of thought.
No, very well stated, in any
Also
case.
wanted-
Sam, please.
Claire, I think I forgot to mention that late March, UN Human Rights Council Resolution 1925, it's basically 1618 again, but in the 19th session. So where we are is going to be procedurally that we're now waiting for the Islamophobia report, and we're going to be waiting for the EU to have their Istanbul process conference. But where do we go from there is the long-term question.
Can I just show important issue here?
Sure, go ahead. Debbie, did you
I
remember?
think I
Go
remembered
ahead,
what I
finish
wanted
your
to
thought,
say.
Debbie, and then we'll come back to
Where do we
you.
go from here? On the issue of the interfaith dialogue, and this ties in with what Tawfiq was saying, is, you know, interfaith dialogue would be a great thing to have in Saudi Arabia. Oh, I guess you couldn't have it with any Jews because it's illegal to be a Jew there. But I think it's very different when some, you know, a lot of organizations here are having it really not to flesh out understanding and truth, but to whitewash what the real problems are. And I think that's the other thing that, you know, to the extent that our government has started enacting policies to do just that, to pretend that there's no problem, to endanger our national security because of their concerns that speaking the truth or a particular viewpoint might be quote-unquote Islamophobic, I think we have to stop that.
Dr. Hamid, please.
Yeah, I thank you. Thank you so much. I would like just to address very important point here briefly, that this book, I just will put it to the camera, is called Minhaj al-Muslim, and it's 2 volumes, a book of creed, manners, characters, acts of worship, and other deeds. So this is a sort of jurisprudence book that sets, I can say, it's global. When you see where it is published, you will be amazed. New York City, London, Riyadh. It's authored by one of the leaders of the religious authorities in Saudi Arabia. And this book is just similar to many other jurisprudence Islamic books. But I'll give you a simple example here on the area where they say an explanation of who is to be killed in apostasy law. Who is to be killed. So the book clearly stated that in page 525, chapter 5 here, everyone, this must be killed according to this book and this teaching. Everyone who openly makes light of the religion, between brackets Islam, regarding its obligations or its recommended acts, or he mocks these things or despises it, despises Islam, or he throws the Quran into an unclean place or steps on it with his foot in order to disgrace it and show hatred towards it, then he has disbelieved, which means became an apostate and must be killed. And all what I'm saying is that the law of the United Nations must be implemented here first. And if they are going to criminalize incitement of hatred and incitement of violence, you are telling me go and kill some human being because he didn't show respect to your religion, for example. So they are literally saying this. So if we are going to implement this law, I'm asking for, first of all, to criminalize publishing such a book, which is a global book that's in the hands of many young Muslims and taught to many of them all over the world. And you go to any Islamic bookshelf here in America, you find this as the standard forms, one of the standard forms of teaching. So what I'm saying here, I ask them for one thing, implement this law on the incitement of violence in these books, first of all, and then think in other parts of the world.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. Hamid and all. Let's turn to the audience now. Dan, you had your hand up, and please wait for the microphone each to come to you.
I'm Dan Pollock with the Zionist Organization of America. Well, originally I was going to address this to Jack Pierce, but I was so moved by the comment just now. I couldn't disagree more with the idea of implementing such a regulation internationally that would criminalize the production of a book. That's an un-American idea. I mean, I think we all know that. It is not our values to go around the world saying books should not be published. So these books should be published, they should be criticized. And that's what the original UN recognition of human rights did back in 1945. That's what we should be returning to. So the question for Mr. Pierce is, what is in America's interest here? It sounded like you were implying that a more watered-down version of this effort is actually in our interests. It seems to me that maybe we should be talking about what is in America's interests. It's probably not the empowerment of any UN vehicle to move along this axis at all, but to return to the original UN ideas. And so a clear movement of a stop, it's probably in America's interest in my view, and I'm interested in your reaction to say, we've gone too far down this road, and let's have a different direction for American policy, which would include not converting the Islamic world to some other mechanism of this, but rather we, the United States, are going to maintain our sovereign rights, and the United Nations should stop trying to regulate such things.
Okay. Fair question, good question. Straight answer, we can't stop participating in multilateral or coordination organizations. And I don't think that necessarily that was what you meant to say, stop. Now, I think we are engaged in a necessary worldwide effort to coordinate trade, to liberalize speech. I agree with you, by the way, on the comment about the book. I agree with you all the way on that. And I don't think that was Dr. Hamid's main point. I think his main point was, in general, if you want to speak to the Islamic community, you want to talk about avoiding prejudice, profiling, and xenophobia. The Islamic community speak to itself about that, right? But I think we need the United Nations fora. I think, in my opinion, our negotiators in this particular situation, this 1618, 167, did a good job. I believe that we have a very important role in trying to push into that international context freedom of speech, freedom of religion, free trade. I happen to come from the antitrust division. Open international commerce. So my instinct is engage, push this down the road. We have the edge. I don't think we're at the point where we're going to call this thing law. Okay, it's a policy. You do international integration, you do it very carefully. But we have to go the route of coordination, in my view.
Thank you.
All right, right down here in front, please. The microphone's coming to you.
Been a lawyer for many years. For each of you, Deborah, a Jew can get into Saudi Arabia. You're looking at one, but I was a guest of Prince Bandar. Dr. Hamid, shukran. You should be on MSNBC. MSNBC every night.
No,
Because everyone in this room reads memory.org. Sam, Dan began his work when I camped with him in the Sinai Desert in 1969. Jack Pierce, fellow lawyer. I began my life as an ACLU lawyer. How far I've come, I can cite you to my article, Merry Christmas from the World of Islam, about 9 murderous attacks on churches in the year 1909. Hardly reported in the American press at all. I wish I could agree with you that we're making progress. I see the Arab Spring in many ways as a disaster that's setting us back. The primacy of the First Amendment is what we should be pushing. The Istanbul process is a disaster. That Hillary, who went to the same law school I did, should be involved in that. In Istanbul, of all places, of course, a betrayal of Ataturk's revolution, which is being undermined every day, that this takes place at all in Istanbul, that the Turks are in the IOC at all. Turkey has more journalists in jail than China does. So eternal vigilance remains the price of liberty. But I thank each of you, and I have to run to 2 other meetings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. She'll take it back. All right, any other, please, Dr. Ramallah.
Ashraf Ramla, Voice of the Copts. I need to do a little bit of comment about Dr. Hamid with Islam and Quran and jihad. Because, I mean, jihad is part of Islam, one of the pillars of Islam. And jihad is going to take Islam, or at least Muslims believe that all the world has to be Muslims. So, I mean, I appreciate your fighting, but I think that you're blowing inside a broken balloon.
No, can I?
Yeah, please respond,
Yeah.
Dr. Hamid.
Thank you for raising the point. I used to think that I'm blowing in this kind of broken balloon for years. But I can see there is a beginning of some change. And I cannot deny that the fact that jihad was typically taught as part and fundamental part of the traditional Sharia and Islamic teaching. However, it will be unfair also to deny that the existence of possible ways to understand the concept of war and in a way to make it limited to early stage of Islam and stop it in the modern times. There are ways to do this through linguistics, through reinterpretations, through using concept level of thinking within the Quran. It's long discussion that needs to be addressed separately. You can go to my website and see some areas of how this could be reformed. What I'm saying here is that it's if you went in human history a few hundred years ago and you saw how humans treat one another, even in the name of religion, you would have thought that it's impossible to make change. And I think our real failure will begin when we say it is impossible. I'm one of the believers that the moment you say there is a possibility of a change, especially the Islamic cortex can justify, for example, the values here of stopping the stereotyping of others, for example. There are clear statements in the Quran that saying that وَلَا يَسْخَرْ قَوْمٌ مِّنْ قَوْمٍ عَسَىٰ أَنْ يَكُونُوا خَيْرًا مِّنْهُمْ. No nation is allowed to disrespect or show any form of disrespect to any other nation. This is a value in the Quran. Another value, some people in the Muslim world go attack some Christians because of a mistake or a problem that happened somewhere else in the world. The Quran is clear, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. You cannot judge a human being by the mistakes of someone else. So there are values that if these values are emphasized and they take hold of the teaching, the Quran was clear. We are talking here about this book teaches killing apostates and Sharia books, but the Quran was, there is no apostasy law in the Quran, and it was very clear, no compulsion in religion. And فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to believe or not to believe, it's up to them. So it depends on the teacher to a great extent. I cannot deny the existence of a problem, especially in the Hadith book and the non-Quranic versions. But if the Muslim words revert more to the Quranic text, with new reinterpretation, there is a hope. And currently, even in Egypt, you know very well that the liberal Muslim, many Egyptians are turning against the Salafis and the Muslim Brotherhood. You have seen this in Egypt. They threw even shoes against the Murshid, the supreme ruler, leader of the Brotherhood. So we are talking here about a crucial stage in human history. If these liberals did not find really any religious interpretation that can really uphold the positive and good values in the religion and suppress the others or reinterpret them differently, we are really going nowhere, because you are telling the world there is a problem that's not solved, that will not be solved. So why we are doing this? Why should we talk about the topic if I'm telling you there is a problem and there is no way for solving it? So we have to believe that there are ways to solve things, and if we think in a positive, constructive manner, we can do things in a better way. And I would like to thank you really for your comment. I really didn't mean it literally to stop publishing or printing, but what I'm saying, if they are criminalizing incitement of violence, let them criminalize this as well. So this was my point. But I do agree with you criticizing it. I apologize if the words did not really convey exactly what I wanted to say.
Thank you. It's always good to hear words of hope. If we could do something about the doctrine of abrogation in Islam,
There is a way.
which negates some of those earlier and more positive and less violent verses in the Quran and replaces them with the ones that came after, if that doctrine could be addressed and changed, then we'd have a possibility. Another question here, please, Elizabeth.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Cassidy with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and as I think some of you know, USERF has been working for years to oppose the defamation concept, and I personally have been working on it for 7 years. I completely agree that the OIC has not given up on its efforts to enshrine legal restrictions, either domestically or internationally, against blasphemy, defamation of religions, whatever you'd like to call it. That said, I do think 1618 is better than the defamation resolutions, partly because the defamation resolutions were just so bad, but it does have some much better aspects to it. In particular, if you look at 1618 in the part where they talk about the only provision in that talks about passing laws actually uses the U.S. First Amendment standards. It says only criminalize incitement to imminent violence. That's better than the ICCPR standard on incitement. So I think we need to be using, this is a battle of ideas. I mean, that's the whole thing. But and the OIC is going to spin 1618 the way they want to. We need to spin 1618 the way we want to and point out that provision and use it against OIC countries when they bring blasphemy cases against people where it's not incitement to imminent violence. So like when Kuwait has just brought charges against somebody for tweeting controversial things about the Prophet Muhammad, say to Kuwait, you're a member of the Human Rights Council, you signed on to 1618, you shouldn't be bringing charges against this guy. In fact, you should be moving your laws toward only criminalizing incitement to imminent violence. So this does actually provide those of us who oppose the whole defamation endeavor with a useful tool to, sort of use something that the OIC has now agreed to our advantage to criticize some of the things that they're doing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's hope that our government does a 360-degree turnaround and moves in that direction.
180 only.
I'm sorry. Okay, I never was too good at math.
Sorry.
The geometry was not my forte.
Stop.
Another question. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and I think we would like to have some concluding remarks here from Dr. Alyami.
Thank you, panels, for excellent presentation. And our next conference, hopefully here, will deal with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, because nobody knows exactly the makeup of this thing in general, or their goals, or who controls what. I think it will be very helpful if we could have another discussion that will explain what this group is all about. Now, a clear first question to the panel is extremely important question. Where do we go from here? And I think just to follow up on what Dr. Tawfiq Hamad said, is actually there is a very small and easy step to take. And that is our government here, our representative, government, it's everybody that we elect to offices, is to say what Dr. Hamad said. If you want this resolution to be implemented, and if you want religions to be respected, then you should implement it in your homelands. I think that will actually empower a lot of Muslim men and women who are saying the same things. And that's what we need. We need to reach out to Muslims who are actually discrediting their religious people, their political leaders. There are millions and millions of Muslims, the people who took to the squares in Cairo and Benghazi and other places, who are rejecting this, who are not only rejecting it, they want something different. They want something you and I enjoy in this country. Freedom. Look, if America opens its gates to all of the Muslims and Arabs, they will leave their hometowns and come here. So they didn't hate us, they didn't hate our values. They love this country. Our problem are with dictators, absolute dictators, religious dictators, and political dictators. Sadly, and it is really sad, that we in this country, in our government, especially this one, but before this one, support some of the most absolute reactionary despots in the world, the government of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf state that has lots of money. And they are the root cause of our problems in this country. Religious extremism come from the Saudi schools. And if this, I wrote a piece recently, what says whose religion is being attacked, something along, I forget what the title is, but the point is that in March, or maybe, yeah, in March, the Saudi Mufti, the highest religious authority in Saudi Arabia, was asked by a Kuwaiti parliamentarian whether Christians should build churches in the Arabian Peninsula. He said, not only they should be forbidden, but the existing ones should be destroyed. This administration did not say one single word about it. No institutions have said anything about it. No media have said anything about it. This is attacking this country's values. Christianity represents something Islam doesn't represent. That's a fact. I had a conversation with a Muslim scholar recently, and I asked him, we engage people inside the Middle East, not just talk here, but we engage people through social media. Give me one sentence in the Quran, the Sharia, or the Hadith that says that individual liberty should be granted. Individual liberty. And he gave me, he gave me some explanation. I said, is there something that says a person can embrace or convert from Islam to Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, anything they want and be accepted in Muslim? He said, that's against Islam. So there is nothing in Islam that is compatible with individual liberty. Absolutely nothing. Nothing. No. It is not. Individual liberty means, individual liberty means you choose the religion you want, you choose the lifestyle you want, you choose the system you want, and it is not. There is nothing in Islam talked about individual liberty to appoint or select or vote for anybody they want. So the point being, religion and state should be separated. Reformation in Islam or any religion is not going to work. There has been a precedence in history. Christianity played a major role in terms of oppression and killing, and until the state and religion were separated, or less. We will have this issue with Muslims. The Muslim people are actually the first and primary victims of what we are talking about here today. And if we could support those who would like to see something different, especially women are leading the pack in the Muslim world, actually. If you notice these revolutions, they are on the forefront. And there is no place where we should support women than in Saudi Arabia. They are actually the biggest advocate of against religious extremism. And I wrote an article that says Saudi heroin and Western ostriches. So while those Saudi women are fighting to get rid of Islamist extremists, the Westerns are supporting the system that oppresses women. So it's our job to continue these discussions, and believe me, you got to develop a thick skin when it comes to these kinds of discussions, or organize conferences like this. You will get punch from everybody. Thank you so very much for coming, and I hope you will carry this message to wherever you go. Invite any of these people to talk to your churches or synagogues or civic groups anywhere, because what you hear today should be heard by all Americans. And I want people who watch us in the video to also invite these people to speak and to support the work that everybody does here, because we are all doing it for the best interest of the nation and of our liberty, without which we will be absolutely nothing. Thank you so very much.